Neiros Chanukah and B'haloischa es Haneirot. On Chanukah we learn, the parsha that we learn in the Torah is the parsha of the Nesiim. We learn the parsha of the Nesiim that talks about the Nedava that the Nesiim brought for the Mishkan and Chanukah's HaMishkan. And there's several reasons given as to why we learn the Parshas and Nesiim. And one is because Chanukah is a Chanukah's habayis of sorts. The Yevonim defiled the Beis HaMikdash and Matama the Beis HaMikdash, and now the Hashmonaim, they're Matayeret, and it was now the inauguration, so to speak, an inauguration of the Beis HaMikdash. So we learn the parsha of the Chanukah's HaNesiim, which talks about a Chanukah's HaMizbeach. Another reason given is that the Mishkan was completed in Chodesh Kislev, but the Chanukah's Mizbeach was delayed and deferred until Nisan. So to be mashlim what Chodesh Kislev was missing, we have the Chanukah, we learned the Chanukah's Mizbeach on Chanukah that was mashlim what Chodesh Kislev was missing. But there's a third reason as well. We learn the Chanukah's HaNesiim, and we continue on and learn up until including the beginning of Parshas Ba'aloischa Haneirot. And it's well known, the Medrash that says that when Aaron HaKohen saw the great Chanukah's HaMizbeach, the Nedava, the Nesiim, and not him and not his Shevet Levi was not part of this great Nedava, of this great offering that the Nesiim brought day by day for the Chanukah's HaMizbeach. He had Chalishas Hadas. He felt bad. He had Chalishas Hadas that he was not part of this, and Shevet Levi was not part of it. And the Rabbi Shalom was Matthias and appeased him and said, Shilcha Godam Neshalahem. Yours is greater than theirs. B'haloischa Haneirot. Because you will have the Hadlokas Haneirot of the Hadlokas Haneirot of the Menorah. In fact, the Ramban, what does this mean? Firstly, what's ma makom? What is the makom over here for Chalishas Hadas? Why should Aaron feel bad? He was instrumental. He was the one. Him and the Kahanim, his children, were the ones that were makriv the karbonos all the time. The Beis HaMikdash, they were makriv all of these karbonos. So why should he feel bad just because the Nesiim brought in the Nedava? And if you'll say that it's because he brought it, it was a chiyuv, it was an obligation, it wasn't the Nedava, and the Nesiim are bringing this voluntarily, well, the Hadlokas Haneirot is also an obligation. It's also not a Nedava. So why is this appeased? How does this appease Aaron? What is being added over here with the Hadlokas Haneirot that he didn't already have? He was makriv all of the korbanos. He was makriv the ketairos. What's the reason for this Chalishas Hadas? What's the basis of it for him to feeling left out and to feel bad? And how does it appease him by saying B'haloischa Haneirot? Zok the Ramban, but there's a reference over here, B'haloischa Haneirot, there's a reference to a different type of Neiros, there's a reference to Neiros Chanukah. Now what does this mean? Perhaps the pshat is as follows. The Nesiim, when it came to the building of the Mishkan, we know that they didn't initially volunteer. They said, whatever is lacking, we will provide. And it came to the end of the building of the Mishkan, there was nothing left for them to do. So they were given the Avnei Shayim and the Avnei Meluim. That would be their contribution. Now the Avnei Shayim and Avnei Meluim are priceless, precious stones. Yet they were at fault. They were criticized for not stepping up immediately, for not volunteering immediately. And even though they donated the Avnei Shem Meluim, but they were criticized for their actions. So here they stepped up right away, And they brought the Nedava for the Chanukah HaMizbeach, the wagons, the covered wagons, etc., which were a major donation, and Nedava, but would not seem to even come close to the cost and the price of Avnei Shem Avnei Maluim. But perhaps the pshat is that what was missing was they gave the Avnei Shem Avnei Maluim, which cost with a lot of money. They were priceless stones, but they did not come and inject their whole being, their whole desire to serve Hashem, to desire to bring for the Nedava, to jump onto it, and with their whole machshava, and to volunteer something that they thought would be the most appropriate, and to come right away, immediately, with their whole desire, with an overwhelming desire to donate something that they felt would be the most appropriate. And they rectified that by bringing the Nedava for the Chanukah HaMizbeach. They put their whole heart and soul into it, the whole machshava into it, the whole ratzon into it, and they brought something very unique on their own, coming from themselves. And it was their chiddush, so much so that when Moshe Rabbeinu saw this Nedava, he didn't want to accept it from him. He didn't want to accept it. Zok the Medrash, Shir Shir, and Medrash says that when Moshe Rabbeinu saw this, he saw this wondrous Nedava and this chiddush, which we'll get to in a moment, this chiddush. Then he said to the Rabbeinu Shalom, perhaps you've decided to give the Torah through the Nesiim and not through me? The Rabbeinu Shalom said, if I had commanded them, if this would be a command, it would come through you. I would deliver the command through you. But this was not a command. I didn't tell him to bring it. And therefore, accept it. Kach mi'itam. Accept it from them. And the Medrash Darshans, kach. Accept it. Me'itam. Me'itam. It was from them. Me'itam haya hadavar. This came from them. It didn't come from me. This was their initiative. This was their nedavam. This was their rotzen. This is their desire. This machshava. All the wonders, dvorim and istorim that were involved in this nedava of the kaf, the ma, of the agolas. This was theirs, and it came through them a chiddush halacha. A chiddush halacha. The ketairos. You can't bring in a dova for ketairos to be makter ketairos. It's not a nidvas yochid. It's not the nedava of an individual, of a private person. It's a korban tzibur. You can't bring a korban chatas as an nedava. A korban chatas comes for an atonement, a kapara for a certain averas. You can't bring a korban chatas benedava. They brought it benedava. They brought these things benedava. This is a chiddush lahaloch. A korban yochid, a nedava, is not doicha Shabbos. This korban was doicha Shabbos. These were chidushi halachas. There's all these wondrous chidushim that came as a result of the Nesiim, that they had this rod sign. Why was that? Kach me'itam. Me'itam, it came from them. It came from their overwhelming desire. And as the Medrash says, when Klal Yisrael has an overwhelming desire, then they don't always have to be told. Sometimes it can come from them, and they can be machadash chidushim. And Moshe Rabbeinu accepted it from them, and then Aaron HaKohen saw that not him and not this his shevet was in this chiddush. These rare occasions. In a rare occasion, when the Kodesh Baruch Hu is maskim to a chiddush that comes, and they weren't part of this chiddush. Yes, they were part of the avoda. They were the integral part of the avoda, but this was a chiddush that they weren't part of it. And Kodesh Baruch has mefayisem, shalcha goel mishalahem. But don't worry, don't feel bad, because yours is greater than you too will have a chiddush. Your descendants will also be mechadish. And yours is greater than theirs, because their chiddush is at the time of the Beis HaMikdash, at the time of the Mishkan. But your descendants will be mechadish, a chiddush that will survive. Even the churban will be even after the time when there's no Beis HaMikdash. V'aloischas Haneirot, which the Medrash says is a reference to Neiros Chanukah. Your descendants will also be mechadish a chiddush, one of the great chidushim. One of the two mitzvahs d'Rabbanan, which are not a safeguard for the mitzvahs of the Torah. They're not gzeiras, they're not takonas. It's a chiddush mitzvah. It's a mitzvah, a new mitzvah. A new mitzvah, a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, Neiros Chanukah. And that your descendants will be mechadish. And with on the same principle as the Nesiyon mechadish. Because me'iton. Because they had this overwhelming desire. They were meiser nefesh to come back to Yevanim. And then they had this overwhelming desire to serve Hashem b'kedusha v'tahara, and they weren't satisfied to use the oil which was tomei. And they searched for the oil that was b'chaisim kohen gadol. And they wanted to use that dafka to serve Hashem in the highest, best way. And that came about through that, the chiddush of the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah. Kach me'iton. It came from them. It came from their desire. Your descendants will also have an overwhelming desire, and they will be mechadish, this great chiddush of Neres Chanukah. And that's the yesod, the foundation of Chanukah, the desire, the rotzen. And then we have this unusual aspect of the mitzvah we don't find elsewhere, that there's mahadrin, the mahadrim and mahadrin, all the different levels of the hidur, because it all comes from a rotzen. And that was the foundation of the Neis Chanukah, to want, to desire, an overwhelming desire. And through that, we can bring about all these wondrous things, through the rotzen, through the desire. There are many great sforim throughout the history of Klal Yisrael that mechaber sforim or mechaber sforim. There are many great initiatives, but very few have really survived the test of time. There's so many sforim that were written by unbelievable Talmidei Chachamim. We don't even know from them. Most of them are lost. There were so many initiatives that were initiated by great tzaddikim, and most of them we don't even know about. But there were some very few that survived the test of time. One example is the Sefer Mishnah Berurah, which is a sefer that not only survives, but continues to grow and become more and more a foundation of Jewish learning, of Jewish life. Simcha Wasserman Zatzal once told me, how is the Chofetz Chaim zeicha to this? He said, the Chofetz Chaim, his purpose in writing the Mishnah Berurah, there was an overwhelming desire, a ratzon, to benefit Klal Yisrael, not to be mechadish his own chidushim, not for himself. It was a sefer that he felt that Klal Yisrael needed. It was for the benefit of Klal Yisrael. He had an overwhelming ratzon, a desire to be mezakeh Klal Yisrael, and with that overwhelming ratzon, with that overwhelming desire, me'iton, Kach, me'itim hayadavar. Rabbi Shalom takes that ratzon, that desire, and establishes something for eternity.